Reaper awoke to the cold bite of steel against his wrists. The air was thick with the acrid stench of sweat and metal, the telltale signs of a holding cell. His head throbbed, a side effect of whatever the slavers had used to knock him out. Around him, groans and muttered curses confirmed he wasn't alone. He shifted his weight, testing the restraints binding him to the bulkhead. The cuffs were alien, smooth metal bands with a faint glow running along their edges. He'd seen something like this before, energy lock restraints, designed to tighten with resistance. That meant brute force was off the table. Fine. He had other ways. A grunt came from his left. Where the hell are we? Reaper turned his head, his sharp gaze meeting the speakers. Jackson, U.S. Marine Corps engineer, sharp mind, rougher attitude. He was flexing his fingers, eyes scanning the restraints the same way Reaper had. No idea, Reaper answered, voice level. But we're not dead, so they need us for something. The cell was dimly lit by a pulsing red glow, casting long shadows over the others. Rodriguez, a sniper with a face like carved stone, sat silently against the opposite bulkhead, his breathing slow and measured. Carter, ex-CIA Black Ops, muttered something under his breath while flexing his wrists. Henderson, the Air Force pilot, leaned against the wall, eyes closed but ears open. Then the door groaned open. Two guards entered, their towering, insectoid frames moving with the fluidity of seasoned warriors. Zeldar, intergalactic slavers, brutal and efficient. One of them let out a guttural click, its mandibles twitching. A mechanical device translated in a cold, artificial tone. You will not resist. You will work. You will be sold. Reaper held its gaze. Behind his eyes, calculations ran like clockwork. Their posture, the way they carried their weapons, energy rifles, high output but prone to overheating. Armor plating on the chest and limbs, but the joints were exposed. He filed the information away. Rodriguez shifted slightly. And if we refuse? The second Zeldar let out a chittering laugh. Then you die now. It pointed its rifle at Rodriguez's head. Reaper moved before the thought had finished forming. Not to fight, not yet, but to gather information. His foot scraped against the metal floor, just enough to shift the slaver's attention his way. It worked. The insectoid turned its head slightly, mandibles twitching. Good. They had peripheral awareness, but relied on sound more than sight. Another note filed away. We're more valuable alive, Reaper said, voice steady. Otherwise, we'd already be dead. The Zeldar studied him for a long moment. Then it let out another mechanical translation. For now. It turned sharply, clicking something to its partner before stepping out of the cell. The door sealed shut behind them with a hiss. As soon as they were gone, Carter exhaled. I don't like this. No one does, Henderson muttered. Reaper leaned back against the wall. They think we're weak. That's our first advantage. Jackson scoffed. Yeah, well, we're shackled and unarmed, so I'd love to know what the hell advantage that gives us. Rodriguez rolled his shoulders. Means they're underestimating us. Reaper nodded. And underestimating humans is a mistake. Silence settled over them, thick with tension. Each of them had been trained for the worst, black sites, enemy capture, survival under extreme conditions. But this was different. They weren't on Earth. No backup. No extraction plan. Just them and a hostile species that saw them as nothing more than property. Reaper closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in, focusing. He'd been in worse. Maybe not in space, maybe not against aliens, but captivity was captivity, and there was always a way out. First step, he said finally. is getting out of these restraints. Jackson tilted his head. You got a plan? Reaper glanced toward the door, then down at the cuffs around his wrists. Working on it. Their survival would depend on patience, on reading their captors, and when the time came, striking with the precision of a knife in the dark. For now, they waited, but not as prisoners, as hunters. The transport vessel shook as it exited hyperspace, the artificial gravity straining to compensate. Reaper braced himself, wrist still bound but mind working. The Zelvar slavers had moved them from the holding cells to a reinforced cargo bay, each prisoner shackled to a bulkhead. The air was thick with oil and rust, the scent of despair clinging to the walls. They weren't the only captives. Other species sat hunched in the dim light, eyes hollow. Reaper ignored them. He focused on his team. Rodriguez sat motionless, head down, eyes half-lidded, but Reaper knew the sniper was observing every detail. Jackson worked at his cuffs with slow, methodical movements, his fingers exploring the alien metal. Carter kept his breathing steady, body loose, ready. Henderson scanned the room, noting guard positions. 2 Zelvar stood near the exit, weapons cradled, mandibles twitching, arrogant, relaxed. They believed their control absolute. Reaper's voice was barely above a whisper. Jackson. The engineer didn't look up. 5 minutes. Maybe less. Reaper nodded. The modified slave collars were almost ready. Jackson had spent hours testing the limits of the alien tech, using the dull edge of a discarded ration tray to peel back the protective layer. The collars had a failsafe, a pulse lock system that tightened when tampered with. But Jackson had found a flaw. If triggered correctly, the power surge wouldn't tighten. It would short out. Rodriguez exhaled slowly. So, what's the plan when these things pop? Reaper glanced at the guards. We hit fast, hard, and we don't stop. Carter's voice was quiet, but firm. Weapons. Reaper shifted his wrists against the restraints. Take theirs. No one questioned it. The ship's intercom crackled, a cold mechanical voice echoing through the chamber. Prepare for descent. Slave auction in 48 minutes. Reaper's hands curled into fists. They weren't going to make it to that auction. Jackson let out a breath. 3 minutes. The Zelvar guards clicked to each other in their guttural tongue, distracted by a console near the door. Reaper took the moment to scan the room again. There were at least 15 other captives. Too many unknowns. Civilians. Potential liabilities. Rodriguez followed his gaze. They'll get in the way. Reaper didn't argue. He would free them if possible, but he wouldn't risk his team. Jackson exhaled sharply. Done. A faint hiss sounded as his collar powered down. He let it hang loose, keeping his hand still, feigning captivity. One by one, the others followed suit. No sudden moves. No sign of change. Reaper kept his breathing steady as he unlocked his own collar. The guards didn't notice. Reaper flexed his fingers. Now, Jackson struck first. He lunged, tearing his collar free and swinging it like a blunt weapon. The metal band cracked against the nearest guard's mandibles, shattering one side. The alien shrieked, stumbling. Reaper moved before the second could react. He wrenched the plasma rifle from its grip, twisting it free and driving an elbow into the alien's throat. The Zelvar gargled, reaching for a blade at its hip. Too slow. Reaper fired. The energy bolt burned a hole through its chest, dropping it instantly. Rodriguez caught the first guard before it collapsed, wrenching the rifle from its grip and spinning toward the door. More coming. The ship trembled. A low hum filled the chamber. The ramp was lowering. Carter grabbed the fallen Zelvar's sidearm, checking its charge. We need to move. Henderson was already at the console, fingers dancing over unfamiliar controls. This thing's locked down. No way to override. Reaper didn't hesitate. Then we go through. The ramp lowered fully, revealing the world outside. Jagged cliffs loomed in the distance, the sky a violent shade of purple. Below, an open-air market sprawled across the valley. Rows of cages, armed patrols, and the unmistakable presence of a Zeldar warlord overseeing the trade. They were outnumbered, but not outmatched. Rodriguez checked his rifle. "We going loud?" Reaper's grip tightened on his weapon. No choice. Carter took a position by the ramp's edge. "On you." Reaper stepped forward, raised his stolen rifle, and pulled the trigger. The first shot struck a Zeldar enforcer in the chest, sending it sprawling. The market erupted into chaos. Guards shouted, weapons igniting. Slaves screamed, some scrambling for cover, others frozen in place. Reaper moved fast, controlled. 2 more shots dropped approaching slavers. Jackson fired into a fuel cache near the cages, the explosion sending debris into the air. Henderson caught a charging guard with a precise shot to the knee, then finished it with a second blast to the head. Rodriguez took position behind a supply crate, his rifle snapping off precise, methodical shots. The warlord stood at the center of the chaos, his mandibles flaring wide in rage. He barked orders, and more guards rushed in. Reaper reloaded. "We need a ship." Henderson scanned the landing zone. There, far side, heavy transport, fully fueled. Carter fired over his shoulder. "Getting to it's gonna be a problem." The slavers were regrouping, forming a firing line. Plasma bolts scorched the air, forcing them into cover. The warlord drew a wicked-looking blade, pointing at them, issuing a challenge. Rodriguez smirked. "Think he wants a fair fight." Reaper exhaled. "Then he's an idiot." He stepped out of cover, rifle up. The warlord roared, charging. Reaper fired. The jungle swallowed them whole. Towering trees, their bark slick with moisture, loomed overhead, casting twisted shadows against the bioluminescent undergrowth. Every breath tasted of damp earth and decay, the air thick with the hum of unseen creatures. Somewhere in the distance, water gurgled over rocks, a stream winding through the alien terrain. It was the only sound, aside from their footsteps, soft, controlled, deliberate. Reaper led the way, his plasma rifle held low but ready. The stolen weapon hummed faintly in his grip, its charge indicator flickering between green and yellow. He'd need to conserve shots. They all would. Behind him, Rodriguez moved like a ghost, his sniper rifle slung across his back. Jackson, sweat beading on his forehead, adjusted the straps on his makeshift pack, filled with salvaged power cells and explosives stripped from fallen slavers. Carter scanned the tree line, his knife held loose in his palm, while Henderson trailed at the rear, his pilot's instincts shifting into survival mode. The Zeldar were hunting them. "They're spreading out," Carter murmured. "They know we're here." Rodriguez knelt, pressing his fingers against the dirt. He examined the tracks, 3-pronged, deep, the imprint of heavy boots. Fresh, 5, maybe 6, moving fast. Reaper nodded. "Scouts. The main force won't be far behind." Henderson wiped a hand across his brow. "We need to keep moving." No, Reaper's voice was calm, absolute. "We turn this around. We're not the prey." A moment of silence passed between them. Then Jackson grinned. "So what's the play?" Reaper gestured to the terrain. "Rodriguez, find a nest. Jackson, set charges on the east ridge. Controlled detonation. Carter, booby-trap the path behind us. Henderson, you're with me. We take the first group up close." Rodriguez was already moving, silent as a shadow. Jackson gave a sharp nod, slipping off to the ridge with quick, confident steps. Carter disappeared into the undergrowth. Henderson exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "And here I was hoping for a quiet night." Reaper allowed himself the barest hint of a smirk. Then he faded into the trees. Minutes stretched into stillness. The jungle held its breath. Then movement. A faint rustle. The clicking of mandibles. The Zeldar were close. Reaper crouched low, body still, eyes locked on the approaching figures. 3 of them. Their exoskeletal armor glistened under the soft bioluminescent glow, weapons raised, scanning the trees. They passed within 10 feet of him. Reaper moved like liquid shadow. His arm wrapped around the nearest Zeldar's throat, wrenching it backward. A sharp, clean twist, snap, the body crumpled. Henderson struck the second. A stolen combat knife plunged deep between its plates, twisting. The alien let out a strangled shriek before falling still. The third turned, mandibles flaring in alarm. Its rifle came up, too slow. Reaper's plasma bolt caught it in the chest. It collapsed without a sound. Then the jungle erupted. The remaining hunters burst from the trees, weapons blazing. Plasma fire scorched the air, sizzling against damp foliage. Reaper and Henderson dove for cover, rolling behind thick roots as the ground exploded around them. Then, Boomstar. Jackson's charges detonated along the ridge, sending fire and rock cascading into the valley. A Zeldar was flung into the air, limbs flailing before vanishing into the darkness. The others hesitated, just a fraction of a second. It was all the time Rodriguez needed. His first shot took one through the eye, the impact snapping its head back in a spray of green ichor. The second shot drilled into another's throat. The third never saw it coming. Carter's traps sprang to life. A razor-thin wire snapped, triggering an explosive device fashioned from salvaged plasma cells. A Zeldar vanished in a spray of fire and smoke. The jungle fell silent once more. Reaper stood, scanning the carnage. Smoke curled from the trees, the scent of charred alien flesh thick in the air. His team emerged from the shadows, untouched. Rodriguez slung his rifle. They'll send more. Jackson grinned, wiping dirt from his face. Let him. Carter kicked over a fallen Zeldar, inspecting the body. We're running out of time. We need a way off this rock. Henderson pointed toward the horizon. Through the trees, faint lights flickered, movement, artificial. A settlement. Reaper's gaze followed. A way out, or another battlefield. Either way, they were going. The settlement loomed ahead, a walled compound of metal and stone, its perimeter lined with crude sentry towers and automated turrets scavenged from old warships. Fires burned in rusted barrels, casting flickering light over the sprawling marketplace within. The air carried the scent of sweat, scorched metal, and desperation. Reaper crouched behind a ridge, eyes locked on the compound's defenses. The Zeldar weren't just slavers, they were war profiteers, selling bodies to the highest bidder. That meant mercenaries, enforcers, dangerous men and creatures willing to kill for a paycheck. Rodriguez lay beside him, scanning the walls through his scope. Turrets are active. Looks like energy-based rounds, medium output. Jackson adjusted the charge pack on his stolen rifle. That means a power source. If we can cut it, those defenses go dark. Carter studied the compound structure. Main entrance is too hot. Guard rotations every 90 seconds. No blind spots. Henderson exhaled through his nose. We need another way in. Reaper traced his gaze along the settlement's perimeter. Then he saw it, near the eastern sector, past a row of caged prisoners. A docking bay sat carved into the rock. 2 ships rested on its platform, one of them a mid-sized hauler, with its engines primed for departure. He pointed. That's our way out. Jackson smirked. So what? We just walk in and steal a ship? Rodriguez chambered around. Wouldn't be the first time. Reaper's voice was steady. We move fast, we move quiet. Rodriguez, you take the ridge, cover us. Jackson, Carter, cut the power to those turrets. Henderson, you're with me. We secure the ship. No hesitation. They broke apart like clockwork. Rodriguez disappeared into the darkness, his snipers nest high above the battlefield. Jackson and Carter circled wide, vanishing behind jagged rock formations. their path leading toward the settlement's exposed wiring. Reaper and Henderson slipped down the ridge, using the shadows of the marketplace to conceal their approach. The compound pulsed with life. Merchants peddling stolen goods, slavers haggling over cargo, mercenaries drinking and laughing, their weapons close at hand. The Zeldar were there, too, towering over the crowd, their mandibles twitching as they oversaw transactions. Reaper and Henderson moved like ghosts, weaving between shadows, each step measured. Then the lights flickered. A low hum echoed through the compound, followed by the sharp crack of a power conduit overloading. Jackson and Carter had done their job. The turret sputtered, their targeting systems failing. The walls were vulnerable. Rodriguez's rifle barked. A Zeldar enforcer dropped before it could react, its body crumpling between two slave pens. The second shot took out a mercenary reaching for his comm. Chaos erupted. Reaper sprinted for the docking bay, Henderson at his side. The guards stationed near the ships were already scrambling, weapons rising. Reaper fired first. His plasma bolt struck the nearest slaver center mass, sending it sprawling over a supply crate. Henderson took the second, a clean headshot dropping the alien before it could sound the alarm. More were coming. Reaper vaulted onto the hauler's loading ramp, checking its control panel. Locked. Henderson knelt beside him, fingers flying over the interface. "Give me 30 seconds." They didn't have 30 seconds. Zeldar warriors swarmed the docking bay, their guttural clicks rising in fury. Plasma fire rained down from the ridge, Rodriguez keeping them pinned. Jackson and Carter arrived from the opposite end, moving fast, weapons hot. Reaper grabbed a fallen rifle, tossing it to Jackson. "Cover us." Jackson grinned. With pleasure. He and Carter took position behind a supply container, their fire cutting through the enemy ranks. Henderson cursed under his breath. Almost there. A Zeldar warlord stormed forward, larger than the rest, its exoskeletal armor reinforced with battle-worn plating. It carried a massive energy blade, its edges crackling with raw power. Rodriguez fired, directed to the chest. The warlord barely flinched. Reaper stepped forward, rifle raised. The warlord lunged. Reaper dodged left, the blade slicing through the air where he'd stood. He countered with a shot to the knee. Armor deflected most of it, but the alien staggered. The warlord swung again. Reaper caught the downward strike on his rifle, metal screeching as the weapon shattered. He rolled with the impact, drawing a combat knife from his belt. The warlord clicked in amusement. Reaper's grip tightened. Then Henderson's voice rang out. "Ship's live." Reaper didn't hesitate. He lunged, driving the knife deep into the warlord's exposed neck seam. The alien let out a strangled hiss, clawing at the blade as its legs buckled. Reaper wrenched the knife free. The warlord collapsed. He turned. "Move." Jackson and Carter fell back, covering their retreat. Rodriguez fired one last shot before slinging his rifle and sprinting toward the ramp. The engines roared to life. Reaper grabbed Henderson's arm, hauling him inside. Jackson and Carter followed. Rodriguez was last, plasma bolts scorching the ground behind him as he dove through the hatch. The ship lifted, thrusters burning as it tore away from the docking bay. Below, the settlement shrank into the distance, sirens wailing. The Zeldar had lost their prize. Reaper exhaled, sinking into the pilot's chair. Jackson grinned, breathless. Now that's an escape. Carter slumped against the bulkhead, shaking his head. "Next time, let's just bribe somebody." Rodriguez smirked. "Where's the fun in that?" Henderson leveled the ship, hand steady on the controls. "Where to?" Reaper stared out at the stars, jaw set. "Anywhere but here."